Welcome, friends, to another episode in our series on the history of the popes. Today we turn our attention to a figure whose brief pontificate, little more than 4 years, left an imprint on the life of the Church far out of proportion to its length. Pope Gelasius I, who governed the See of Rome from March of 492 until his death on the 19th or 21st of November in 496, stands as one of those quiet but decisive architects of the papal office in the centuries after the Western Empire's collapse. We must first picture the world in which Gelasius lived and worked. The year 476 had seen the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, the last nominal emperor in the West, and by Gelasius's time Rome itself lay under the rule of the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, an Arian Christian whose court maintained a policy of pragmatic tolerance toward the Catholic majority. The city, once the centre of a vast empire, was now a shadow of its former self. Its population diminished, its aqueducts in disrepair, its streets haunted by the memory of invasions. Yet the Bishop of Rome continued to exercise a moral and spiritual authority that no barbarian king could fully ignore. Gelasius himself was, according to the Liber Pontificalis, of African origin, natione afer, though he describes himself in one letter as Romanus natus, born a Roman. This apparent discrepancy has long puzzled scholars. Perhaps he was born in Rome of African descent, or perhaps his family had roots in the province of Africa. In any case, he had risen through the ranks of the Roman clergy, serving under Pope Felix III as a trusted secretary and drafter of documents. When Felix died, Gelasius succeeded him without apparent controversy, a sign of the continuity and administrative competence that marked the Roman Church in this era. His pontificate unfolded against two major horizons. The first was the ongoing drama of the Acacian Schism, a rupture between Rome and Constantinople that had begun under Gelasius's predecessor. The schism took its name from Acacius, the late Patriarch of Constantinople, who had collaborated with Emperor Zeno in issuing the Henoticon, a compromise formula intended to reconcile the monophysites who rejected the Council of Chalcedon's teaching on Christ's two natures. Rome viewed the Henoticon as ambiguous at best, heretical at worst, and refused communion with those who accepted it. Gelasius inherited this standoff and pursued it with unyielding firmness. He insisted that reconciliation required the explicit condemnation of Acacius and the erasure of his name from the diptychs, the liturgical lists of the living and the dead. When Patriarch Euphemius of Constantinople and Emperor Anastasius sought a more flexible path, Gelasius refused any formula that might compromise the honour of the Apostolic See or the clarity of Chalcedonian orthodoxy. In letter after letter to Eastern bishops, he reiterated the primacy of the See of Rome, not as a matter of mere prestige or imperial favour, but as a divine institution rooted in Christ's commission to Peter. The Bishop of Rome, he argued, spoke with the voice of Peter. His authority was not derived from councils or synods, but from Christ himself. This insistence on Roman primacy forms the backdrop to Gelasius's most famous and enduring contribution, his articulation of the relationship between spiritual and temporal power. In a lengthy letter of 494 addressed to Emperor Anastasius, known often as the Famuli Vestrae Pietatis, or simply the Duocent Letter, Gelasius set forth a principle that would echo through the Middle Ages and beyond. He wrote, "There are two powers, August Emperor, by which this world is chiefly ruled, the sacred authority of the pontiffs and the royal power. Of these two, he continued, the authority of the priests is the more weighty, because they must render an account even for the kings of men before the divine judgment. While the emperor rightly governs temporal affairs, in matters divine he bows his head before the leaders of the clergy and receives the means of salvation from their hands. In this realm he is subordinate rather than superior. This was no mere rhetorical flourish. Gelasius was writing at a moment when the Eastern Emperor still claimed a significant role in church affairs, and when the Western Church found itself under the protection of a barbarian king who professed a different faith. By distinguishing the two spheres so clearly, and by asserting the ultimate weight of the spiritual, Gelasius offered a framework that preserved the independence of the Church without denying the legitimacy of civil authority. Later generations would interpret his words in varying ways. Some saw in them the basis for the two swords doctrine, in which both spiritual and temporal power ultimately resided in the Church. Others viewed it as an early statement of separation between church and state. But Gelasius himself seems to have intended a careful balance, one that recognized divine origin for both powers while insisting on the superior responsibility of the priesthood. Beyond these great matters of East-West relations and church-state theory, Gelasius was a diligent pastor of the local church. He wrote numerous letters, more than 40 survive, along with fragments of many others, addressing everything from clerical discipline and the administration of church property to the proper division of ecclesiastical revenues into 4 parts: one for the poor, one for the fabric of churches, one for the bishop, and one for the clergy. He enforced strict standards against abuses even in times of hardship, and took measures to detect hidden heretics, such as the Manichaeans in Rome, by requiring reception of the Eucharist under both kinds. One of his more striking interventions was his successful campaign against the ancient Lupercalia festival. This venerable Roman rite, with its elements of fertility and purification, had lingered on even after the empire's Christianization. When a senator named Andromachus defended its continuation, Gelasius responded with a sharp treatise, arguing that such customs were incompatible with Christian purity and that their persistence dishonored the faith. He prevailed and the festival was suppressed, a small but telling sign of the Church's growing confidence in reshaping the cultural landscape of the city. Gelasius was also active in liturgical matters. Though the so-called Gelasian sacramentary belongs properly to a later century, many prayers and prefaces in the Roman tradition trace their origins to his time or bear his influence. He composed treatises defending Chalcedonian Christology and refuting the errors of Nestorius and Eutyches. His style in writing was vigorous, sometimes elegant, occasionally dense, always the work of a man who had spent years in the careful formulation of ecclesiastical documents. When Gelasius died in late 496, he left behind a church that, though materially impoverished, was spiritually more assertive. His pontificate bridged the patristic age and the emerging medieval world, setting precedents for papal independence and authority that would guide his successors through centuries of challenge. In the end, what stands out about Gelasius is not grandeur or spectacle. He was no Leo confronting Attila, but the quiet, tenacious clarity with which he defined the role of the successor of Peter. In an age of confusion and shifting powers, he reminded the Church that its deepest authority came not from emperors or kings, but from the mandate given by Christ to Peter. That reminder has proven remarkably durable. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. Until our next episode, may we all carry forward the lessons of the past with wisdom and charity.